Yeah. Hello and good morning to everyone. Welcome to the 2025 SFMI Awards and report launch. We've just started, so what I'm going to do is to leave for about a minute. We've got a number of people joining, and then we'll kick off with the awards and report launch. Okay, so we still have a number of people joining. I'll give it a few more seconds. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 SFMI Awards and report launch. We've got quite a lot to get through over the next hour and a half, and if I can get this working, through the agenda. So, quick overview of the SFMI, the program that's taking place, but also a look into 2025 and what's happened. I'll also take you through the regulatory updates and some of the changes which have been coming along, but also importantly for the sector is how can the sector respond to some of these regulatory changes. And then Kristen will take you through the findings from the SFMI 2025 programme, key learnings that's come out from that, and some of the key trends that we're also starting to see, and also take us through next year's programme. And very excited to talk about the online assessment, which we are going to be launching shortly. And then importantly, it's the awards. So finding out we have the awards, we have the Rising Star as well, and the Platinum organisations. There's a bit of time at the end for Q&A, so please do use the chat function to put your questions in. And as we go through, please do put as many in. If we can't answer them all at the end of the webinar, we'll provide a response back to you. The slides, and there will be a recording, so that will also be available to you as well. And then we plan to finish off by 11 o'clock. Okay, so speakers will be myself. I'm the Managing Director of Aclara Advisory. Background is getting up, unfortunately, to about 30 years now working within the space of property and corporates. And my colleague, Kristen, senior consultant, well-versed in strategic delivery programs and climate risk for the partners who attended the recent climate risk workshop, which Kristen led. And so please do add questions into the Q&A function and we'll answer them at the end. Okay, so a bit of background to the SFMI and who we are. So the SFMI is the only program that's dedicated to the facilities management sector. So our role is very much about providing guidance and advice for the facilities management sector, whether that's organisational led or whether that's a service provider or the supply chain activities. Our mission is about how do we deliver a better property management for tomorrow. And the programme and the approach that we go about doing that is through a number of different measures. Primarily, it's a collaborative approach that we look at. So we want to learn and understand about what's good, what's positive, how do we drive change through, and how does that change become consistent and drive real value for organisations, for customers, and for society as well. So it's both an inward-looking element, sharing knowledge and experiences, but it's also an outward-looking element. How does the sector reach out to the customers, to UK PLC, so that we start to talk about some of those change agent activities? And we're proud and honoured to work with some fantastic organisations who are driving a lot of this progress across their businesses, into their customer activities, and as membership organisations as well, through a range of individuals, not just in the UK, but globally as well. And we also have a huge amount of information that is available. And so a large amount of it is available free to access through our website. And we also have a partner portal, which contains significantly more information, webinars, training materials as well, which is also accessible. Some of the information that we've got in there, we've mentioned about the climate risk work that's been happening, and that's certainly been highly prevalent this year, and a report that was written earlier on about what that means for the built environment, but also the Scope 3 framework, which has now been adopted as part of the net zero carbon building strategy and adopted by RICS in terms of being able to model the whole life carbon footprint. The framework that we've developed is a core part of that. Okay, so we'll dive into the 2025 industry overview. And in terms of what's happened, so what has happened in the last 12 months? An awful lot has occurred. There's probably quite a few adjectives that you could choose to describe this year. The one that I'm going to use is divisive. It has been hugely challenging in terms of the cross messages which are starting to come through. There's some of the recent announcements which have been coming through from the Attorney Generals in the US is firmly placing some of the European regulations, CSRD, CS3D, US organisations who comply with those regulations would be seen as unlawful in the US due to what's classified as deceptive trade practices. So the Attorney Generals have been sending out information and letters out to organisations, encouraging organisations to understand where the US position is and the best practices and how to operate in the best practices for the UK government and the UK administration, the US government and the US administration. But combined with that, we've also had some research which has been done looking at the costs associated with the anti-ESG policies and additional costs in the range of 1 to 1.5% from any borrowing that takes place. Due to needing to look at poor quality investments that are coming through. So we're also starting to understand that there's a direct financial implication from not following through with some of these ESG activities. We've also just come to the end of COP30. And again, the divisive nature, the overtones of the politics, again, was quite prevalent during the conversations there. What has come through is a clear understanding that this divisive approach doesn't lend itself to the original consensus-based approach that COP was founded on some 30 years ago. And so we are moving towards a different way of operating, and that's going to be tested very much at the next COP, which is taking place, again, very differently. It's been held in Turkey, but it's going to be chaired by Australia. And in here, we're now looking at a two-tier system. We have global minimum standards, and then we also have coalitions and groups which are going to target tighter and more structured ambitions which they want to drive towards. We've also had part of the pre-announcements by the UN, the 1.5 degree target has almost passed. But in the context, we also need to understand where we've come from. And in 2009, at the Copenhagen COP, the world was on track for 3.5 degree warming. We're now moving towards a 2.2 to 2.4 degree centigrade warming. So what that means is the understanding that climate adaptation, the changes that's going to come about from increases in temperature, is now baked into forward plans and into the roadmaps. So that's almost been taken as a given that we will start to have a need for adaptation plans to be incorporated and to be engaged, and for governments and for businesses to take that into account. From a FM sector, property, infrastructure and agriculture will be severely impacted. We're already seeing some early estimates again in 2025. We're starting to understand that food prices has led to up to a 1% increase in inflation already, and that level is going to increase. So the inflationary impacts that we're starting to see from climate change is already starting to be understood, to be seen, which again has direct impacts then on forward pricing mechanisms. But this is expected, and this divisive approach, the challenge in that we're getting, should be expected, because as sustainability matures as a subject, we should expect to be challenged. We should expect to be asked to explain how our approaches do align and do fit into the business strategy. So the key is, how do we respond to those challenges? And what we're starting to see as part of the maturing of sustainability is a number of key trends. So independent audits and requests for further information, challenging the data and asking for quality information is becoming a prerequisite. Now that helps to combat greenwashing, but that level of data and knowledge can also provide the insights which helps decision making by the senior management team. Aligned with that, we also need the commentary and the statements which organisations are putting out, the progress that has been made, the benefits that are starting to come through. How do organisations justify that talk? How do you explain about some of the wonderful things that are starting to happen and that are taking place, and the impacts and the value that's coming through? And as part of the report that we've written, we had a quick dive into some of the social value measures which are available from FM property organisations. And what we're starting to see is a massive spread that exists. So we've quantified them all in terms of social value impacts versus £1 million turnover for an organisation. And the difference between them for similar activities is up to 50 times difference. And that doesn't help us from a sector at all. That level of change says that we're not having a consistent approach about how we communicate, and therefore the trust in the level of information that we put forward can't be taken forwards as being an actual benefit that's been driven through. So the improvements of how we as a sector overall start to provide that reporting, have a consistency in messaging, becomes a hugely important message to be able to get that the engagement of senior management through as well. And together, we're also not seeing the FM frameworks able to support and drive through these changes. So particularly looking at combating greenwashing, being able to justify the talk, being able to justify the changes. How can we start to get the FM framework bodies take that as being a key and critical item that goes through? And therefore, when we can pick up organisations on those frameworks, we already understand and know that they have been through some checks and balances around assurance and assurity over the packages of work they're providing. But all of that comes in the context that the sustainability proposition overall is maturing. And I go back to my earlier comment that we are being challenged. The approach that we're taking is being challenged because we're being seen as being part of the business case delivery. We now need to move on and upwards the conversation, the way that we communicate, so that we can be taken seriously at that business level. And this is the business strategy, it's the forward planning mechanism where the sustainability elements and activities are incorporated as part of that decision-making process. So that's the general trends that we've seen coming into 2025. And a lot of that is also rolled into and aligned with the regulatory changes that we're starting to see as well. So there is a lot of regulations that are around, both in terms of the standards that takes place and the regulations that are in place. But also what we're starting to see is a huge amount of consolidation around the regulatory drivers. So the recognition that we're having to take an activity and a requirement and report out on it in multiple different ways, which isn't best use of time for any organization and isn't best use of time either for a regulator. So combining a lot of this under the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, helps enormously to get that consistency in reporting, not just UK, but also globally as well. And that divisive nature is also coming through as part of the regulatory changes. And globally, we're starting to see a lot of push and pull in the regulatory program and how that's being packaged and picked up. Within the EU, the CSRD and the omnibus reforms has helped to move up the level, and arguably what the EU had originally proposed and put in was hugely stringent, was the top end of expectations, and that's been pared down to a more realistic and reasonable level. Where that ends up is still open to negotiation, and there's still some debate on it. But the idea and the intention is that we start off at a position and then we ramp it up over time to bring more organisations into scope as part of the regulatory regime and reporting requirements. And we have similar areas and activities taking place across the globe as well. California, we've had 2 regulations which have come through recently, looking at greenhouse gas reporting, scopes 1, 2, and 3, as well as the climate risk reporting for large organisations who are directly involved, but also provide services to organisations based in California. So you may not be based in the US at all, but if you are a major supplier to an organisation based in California, you may well come within the jurisdiction of reporting. And across the UK, we've had a constant dialogue around the implementation of the sustainability disclosure requirements in the UK SRS. And again, the alignment of that with the ISSB, but we also have the addition of a transition plan requirement baked in as part of that. The timelines associated with that is moving out by a year or 2, but the expectations that now are starting to see is this is an outward report. It's signed off by directors. It goes into the public regime, and therefore, from the work that we've done with organisations helping to prepare, we're looking at a 2-year time frame to go from a standing start to having those reports being available. So a lot of what I've been talking about has been sustainability reaching a level of maturity. The question then is, how do we start to unlock the value for organizations from the data, the knowledge, the information, the insights that we're able to capture from the sustainability activities? How do we start to drive that through into the forward direction for the business? So we do understand a number of the challenges, and certainly one part of what the SFMI assessment helps organisations to do is really to understand the nuances of those challenges, the interconnected nature of them, and understanding some of the issues and material impacts for that business. So the next stage on from that is understanding its relevance to the organisation and how material it is to the business operations and its stakeholders. So that's a materiality assessment that gets performed. And again, the FM sector is different to the real estate sector, which is different to the construction sector. So those material elements will be different, towards that sectoral activities and those sectoral responsibilities. So performing it aligned from a benchmarking perspective, aligned into the sectoral activities becomes important. That can then get rolled up at that wider organisational view. The outputs of this then helps us to understand both the regulatory confidence, but also how we can best use that data and the reporting to demonstrate effective communication and dialogue as well. So then this becomes truly as part of unlocking the value, but it's talking about how do we start to drive forwards the improved benefits that comes through from the organisation. Yeah. And so some of the implications that we have for workplace and FM is looking across the board. So we have a broader disclosure set of activities around climate, human capital, biodiversity, and energy. So that links up with a number of different areas, whether that's reaching out towards things like well-being, reaching out to social value impacts as well. But these broader disclosure scopes will then also connect out to some of the regulatory reporting standards which are in place. We've got the materiality assessments that we're starting to look at, the impact, risk and opportunity, IROs, which are, again, being looked at and asked for from areas, not just the regulation, but the new ISO 14001 environmental management standard looks explicitly at impact, risk and opportunities being developed and prepared. So this exercise of a sustainability strategy will also need to take place as part of that 14001 programme. And it's also about that wider value chain engagement as well, your upstream activities as well as your downstream activities, and the issues, the impacts that comes from that. So scope 3, again, becomes quite a significant issue, but so does social value and modern slavery as well. And we have a revision to Section 54 for the modern slavery regulations, which are also coming through. What that helps us to deliver is the transparency, the competitive advantage, and also, importantly, how we implement and we deliver that interoperability of the standards and the reporting requirements. And so why does the strategy matter and why is it important? A lot of what I've been talking about has been some of the regulatory changes which have been coming through. And those, whilst there are push and pulls on them, they're all tending to come together in a consistent manner and a consistent approach. We've also been starting to talk about some of the trends which are coming through over 2025 in terms of sustainability within the sector is being taken forwards and is being recognised, it's being challenged, and we now need to be better at how we articulate the value that comes through. So a mechanism and a means to be able to capture all of this together, to understand what the impacts are, not on a short-term basis, but on a longer-term perspective as well, becomes critical and important. That then helps to drive through that value. But importantly, it also helps organisations to be able to communicate effectively what matters most to them and why, and to make sure that the time and the effort, the focus and the engagement of stakeholders, supply chain, customers, is also on those areas that matters most to the business. So we're not flying off and starting to engage in one-off activities which are coming through, but this is about having that conversation and dialogue through tender conversations, through customer engagement activities, through supply chain conversations about materially how do we move the needle and change and improve the sustainability performance in key areas. All of that then leads on to that longer term value because we have a consistent structured approach moving forwards, not just year by year, but we're planning 3, 5, 10 years ahead on that programme. Yeah. And looking at this on a building specific perspective, we also have a number of changes which are taking place for building by building. So we still have a regime in the UK where the sustainability performance of a building is judged and determined at design stage. So energy performance certificates, BREEAM assessments, and so on, which are being used by at the real estate level. That has led on to a huge amount of unintended consequences as a result. The energy performance certificates, there were a couple of consultations which have happened during the year. Those are being reviewed and updated, and there's a meeting that we're going to be involved in with CLG in January to discuss what some of those changes are and what the implications will be for properties. We've also got the continued phase down of refrigerant gases. 79% reduction by 2030 is the target, but we're also starting to see over time equipment bans, particularly on air conditioning units and commercial refrigeration, but importantly, service bans from 2030. So this is where we won't have topping up of certain refrigeration units. So if they lose their gas, they will be non-functional. So this is the time frame to start to look at the forward plans for retrofitting cooling systems and putting in place those scheduling activities based upon risk and how that's going to affect organisations. Smart waste regulations also came in this year, principally looking at food waste and assurances. Organisations who have more than 10 employees now need to separate food waste and to have separate waste collections for that. That becomes challenging, particularly for smaller organisations. And last month we had AWAB's law that came in, which mandates social landlords to respond on serious housing hazards. And in particular, it's around mold growth and understanding and identifying types of mold. So again, there's a lot of work that we've been involved in understanding some of the implications for AWAB's law, the testing methodologies that sits behind it. But part of that is also led on by changes in terms of the ventilation standards, poor indoor air quality as well. So another mechanism is how do we avoid more properties coming into scope where mold growth is seen because we've put in there poor ventilation standards and indoor air quality. Yeah. Okay, so we'll provide a bit more comms out about some of those conversations, engagements as well for next year. Okay, so that was a quick run through of 2025, some of the regulatory changes and the shifts that's coming through. I'm now going to hand over to Kristen to take you through the 2025 SFMI findings.
Great. Thanks, Sunil. Can you see my screen? I think I've just taken over the control. Yeah?
Yeah.
Great. Perfect. Thanks, Sunil. That was a really useful sort of background and understanding of what's going on in the world. Now I'm just going to talk you through some of the findings from this year's assessments. We ran these assessments from September through to October. And our report has come out this morning. So I'm going to give a brief overview of some of the key findings from that. So just a background on the assessments. So the SFMI assessments, we run them every year, and they examine partners' strategy and operations to assess how effectively they align with sustainability principles and the SFMI values. So we have 22 different criteria across ESG, and within those we have over 300 questions. And the way that we rate partners is they get a score within each of these criteria, but also within subcategories of these criteria from 0 to 5, with 5 being the sort of most advanced practice and 0 being they don't do anything on it. So there's essentially 3 stages to the assessment process. So the first stage is an initial assessment. This is a sort of desktop assessment that we do based on information that we have about your FM, along with sort of historical information that we have if we've been working with the partners a long time. The next phase, which is from September to October, are in-depth interviews over either 1 or 2 days. These interviews are with one of our auditors and usually a number of different stakeholders within the FMs. And we go through all of the 22 criteria and the relevant subcategories and determine the sort of level that each of the FMs are at within those categories. And then based on the sort of initial responses in these assessments, we also ask for additional evidence. So sometimes the evidence can be demonstrated within the assessment process, but sometimes we will need additional evidence to support the claims made within the assessment process. And so after the assessments, FMs have a few weeks to send us the additional evidence to demonstrate their sustainability progress. So these are the 22 criteria across E, S, and G. So this year we did quite a bit of sort of changes within. Oh, sorry, is it not on the right slide?
I think it is on the right slide. We've got 20
It is? Okay, cool.
criteria changes.
Do you have control, Sunil, or is it me? I can't understand you, sorry.
Yeah, I've still got control, so I'll
Oh,
toggle through.
okay, great. Thank you. So this year we made quite a few changes to the criteria. We wanted to make them as clear as possible. So we created subcategories within the criteria. We narrowed them down from 23 criteria to 22. And we tightened the specifics of what we're looking for within each of these criteria. We also looked at some additional sort of aspects within each of the criteria that show more demonstrable progress. So, for example, social value being part of the strategy of a responsible organization. We also expect board commitment to be a sort of foundational step in leading initiatives. Climate modeling and scenarios were also now included for high scores. And this reflects the sort of developments in the industry and also stakeholder expectations, as a lot of incoming and recent regulations require some level of scenario analysis in order for a company to be sort of progressing in their sustainability journey. Materiality also became even more crucial as this has been something that CSRD has pushed forward and is also a sort of crucial point of ISSB. Next slide, please. It's just a brief overview, sort of a look at some of the recent years' trends that we've seen in the report. So with 2022, we saw a sort of growing understanding and engagement with sustainability. 2023, we saw a sort of deepening of understanding and more sort of structured improvements. And last year, the report focused on the commercialization of high-value sustainability initiatives. So we saw last year that FMs are really starting to find opportunities within sustainability and find ways that they could increase efficiencies and increase their bottom line through sustainability strategies and initiatives. And this year, and the focus of this year's report, is that FMs are moving beyond ad hoc sustainability initiatives and they're finding more integrated long-term transformation. The report this year is really about FMs focusing effort where it matters most. I feel like in the last few years, there's been so many changes in the regulatory environment, and FMs and companies in general are often sort of overwhelmed with the laundry list of sort of focus areas that they need to be incorporating. And the last year or so has seen with the pushing of materiality being a key concept in sustainability, FMs are really starting to understand what issues matter to them and to their business and really focusing their efforts there so as to best use their resources, time, and expertise. Next slide, please. So if you all read the report from last year, then you'll be aware that we developed 4 key themes for last year that reflected trends that we'd seen within FMs. So last year, the 4 key themes that we found were decarbonisation, well-being, social value, and risks and opportunities. And this year's report continues on those 4 themes, and I'll get into a little bit more detail of the trends that we've seen within those in the next few slides. So first, we have decarbonisation. So decarbonisation theme encompasses the 3 criteria: energy, transport, and supply chain management. And you can see on the bottom right here, the sort of upward trend that we've seen in the last few years after a sort of slight dip from 2019 to 2021. We saw a 1% increase in scores from last year. The criteria updates that I mentioned earlier now mean that top scores require a credible net zero strategy, verified carbon footprint, and publicly available data. And this reflects the sort of wider sustainability environment that is requiring sort of more verifiable, accurate data in order to prove decarbonisation. So again, this theme saw the sort of similar shift from moving from broader ambitions within decarbonisation to having a sharper focus on the areas that will have the biggest impact to their company. Next slide. So here are some key findings that we found this year. So firstly, the challenge of accurately measuring Scope 3 Category 1's emissions is emerging. And partners are also supporting their supply chains to understand and manage carbon emissions. And so we're seeing this across the board. Understanding and engaging with one's supply chain is becoming a key issue. An example of this was Churchill's decarbonisation resource hub for vendors. So we worked with them to develop tools for them to better understand their suppliers, including a GHG inventory calculator, target setting tool, and guidance materials. We also see that FMs are coming up against obstacles to move to a fully electric vehicle fleet. This is also highlighted in the report. Some of the initial progress in decarbonising their fleets has been successful, but FMs are starting to come across more challenges when it comes to sort of heavier vehicles and sort of getting that sort of final part of their fleet decarbonised. And there are also issues that several FMs mentioned where the customers are not allowing suppliers to use charging points at their site, which is an example of a sort of disappointing lack of collaboration, which is essentially key to sort of moving decarbonisation forward in FMs. Next slide, please. So next theme is well-being. So we saw in the report, you'll see in the report, and we saw in our assessments that FMs have made really strong progress in understanding what affects their own staff. They have been using continuous feedback, data, and digital tools to really understand stress points and safety concerns. And then they're designing focused interventions. And we have some good examples in the report of FMs that have used this feedback and used data to better understand why certain issues are arising, why there are certain incidents, and then to use that data to correct it and intervene. But the next step in this process is to extend this evidence-based approach and using all these different tools that they have to client workspaces and shift the focus beyond FM's own teams to the wider workforce. And that's a really important next step, and something that we also emphasize in the report is the importance of collaboration. And while FMs should initially be focusing a lot of these efforts on their own staff and on their own businesses, eventually the goal will be to increasing this outside of their own business and to collaborating more with FMs. And here you'll see again, so the criteria within well-being is employee well-being, health and safety, employee development, and risk management. And you'll see here that while we had a slight dip in 2025 for these overall criteria, that is more reflection of the tightening of the criteria this year as opposed to an actual sort of dip in progress. Next slide, please. So 3 key trends that we've seen in well-being. So we're really seeing technology emerging as a really useful tool within well-being. And so FMs are using apps more to signpost their well-being services. So for example, Amy had a health assured wisdom app, and MCOR also has an app for supporting staff through the to-pay process. FMs are also introducing technology that supports a mobile workforce. So we had examples of some FMs using in-car telematics to monitor driver alertness, so tracking steering wheel movements, lane drifting, and eye movements. And this really helps to understand where issues are arising and make sure that the well-being, safety of staff are paramount. And then finally, there is a focus on their own staff, as I mentioned before. There's limited initiatives at the moment extending to client staff, but this is something that can be quite easily translated or can be translated to the client side. And we're seeing FMs beginning to sort of think about how they can offer these services to clients to really differentiate their services. Thank you. The next theme is social value. So the criteria as part of this are stakeholder engagement, employment, diversity, sustainable communities, employee development, and supply chain management. So social value has really been a standout in terms of progress over the last few years. You'll see that there were strong gains made both last year and this year. And there's a growing recognition within the understanding of social value that you can't just be relying on quantitative metrics. We saw last year a lot of FMs demonstrate their social value proposition through monetary values and numbers that vastly varied across companies and didn't actually really reflect the work that was being done in any sort of meaningful manner. So now we're seeing companies start to shift more towards storytelling and qualitative data to really demonstrate where FMs are making meaningful contributions to the social value criteria. And that's a really sort of interesting and useful trend that we're seeing sort of across these different criteria within social value. Next slide. So 3 of the sort of trends that we've seen and highlighted in the report, social value is increasingly being tailored to customers' needs. So FMs are understanding and working with their clients and with local needs and communities to really understand the areas to prioritize. So it's not just a sort of laundry list of items that they're doing, but they're really finding the areas and the impacts that will be most important within their communities. FMs are also adopting more qualitative approaches to assess social value. So as I just mentioned, a lot of the sort of number-based approaches were not particularly useful in reporting and didn't tell a full story. And it felt more like a box-ticking exercise. Whereas now you're seeing more qualitative storytelling that really capture the sort of behaviors behind these initiatives. And finally, we're seeing a shift in the platforms that are used. So we're seeing several partners have reported using Thrive. We've also seen some partners develop integrated social framework, and this helps integrate social value into different business units and across contracts. Next slide. Finally, the final category, the final theme are risks and opportunities. So the criteria aligned with risks are nature, ecology and water, supply chain risk management, and then the criteria aligned with opportunities are board commitment, circular economy, diversity, and contracts. And we've seen here a slight dip in the opportunities and a slight dip in risks, but that again reflects a more stringent and tightened approach to these different criteria within these categories this year, as we mentioned earlier, that we're really trying to sort of hone in on what really matters within these criteria. And what we've seen is that FM leaders are beginning to target their attention to climate and resilience risks that matter most for the assets and contracts that they manage. So risk management and opportunity understanding can be somewhat daunting to FMs. It's a sort of can be a difficult area to understand. Climate risk assessments or risk and opportunity assessments can be time consuming and costly. But now we're starting to see that FMs are getting a better understanding of what risks and opportunities actually matter to their business. Again, with the whole materiality element, and they're really focusing on those and focusing their energy and attention on those. So next slide. So two sort of key findings that we pull out in the report on this theme is climate adaptation is becoming increasingly important. And we're seeing many SFMI partners actively promoting services around climate resilience and adaptation as the physical risks of climate change become ever more evident. Having an adaptation plan and adaptation initiatives is becoming an imperative for FMs, and we're only going to see that increase in future years. The other key theme that we saw within risks and opportunities is that materiality needs to be more of a focus in the market. So there's still a missing link between materiality and risk, and then also a quantification of that risk. So FMs, while they're making great progress in better understanding their risks and moving towards those risks that really matter, a better understanding of how to assess the materiality of risks and how to assess what that means in numerical terms for the business is kind of the next step that we'll hopefully see FMs tackling in the future. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we released the report this morning. The QR code here, you can download it. It's also available on our website, and we will be sending a link to the report to attendees after this session. So please do give it a read. We talk about all of the key themes that we've mentioned here in much more detail, along with case studies, examples, and really useful information for understanding the state of the FM sector for 2025. So now on to this or next year's program and a few updates, including the online assessment. So the 2026 SFMI program, through our conversations with FMs this year, we learned that FMs are really wanting increased collaboration. I hosted a climate risk forum earlier this month with a number of SFMI partners. It was a really useful and productive session. And one of the key things that came out of that session was that FMs find it incredibly useful to have a forum to knowledge share, to talk about the challenges that they're facing, to hear about what other companies are doing to find solutions and to brainstorm what we can do in the sector to increase progress against risks, opportunities, social value, a variety of different topics. So we're going to be hosting more face-to-face forums in 2026 with our partners to help encourage deeper engagement on the material issues shaping the FM sector. We're going to be launching a sort of working group, which will hopefully meet every sort of 4 to 6 weeks next year, where we'll discuss different topics, problems that FMs are facing, and really provide a platform for FMs to get together and collaborate in a much more meaningful way. We'll also be hosting a number of partner forums, like I mentioned earlier. We had the climate risk forum earlier this month, and we also had the social value forum over the summer. We'll be doing one on well-being early in the year, and hosting a number of different forums again later next year, depending on what topics are most relevant to FMs. And the online assessment, which I'll speak about in a moment, it provides a tool for SMEs, suppliers, and companies at the start of their sustainability journey with a simplified ESG baseline. It's a self-assessment tool, but it's going to be a very useful tool for smaller companies or companies that maybe don't know where to begin in sustainability, and also will prove a useful tool for larger, more sustainable FMs to engage with their supply chains and better understand the sustainability levels of their supply chains. Benchmarking and assessment. So our audits are examining partner strategy and operations to assess how they effectively align with sustainability principles and SFMI values. As always, we continually update our assessment process to make sure that it is keeping in line with the regulatory environment, with trends within the industry, and that will continue on into next year. So the online assessment tool. So essentially, it is a self-assessment tool online, as it says on the tin, and it's a practical, sort of tailored tool for FMs to understand their sort of ESG baseline. It's based off of a number of the criteria within the SFMI assessments. Instead of the full 22 criteria, I believe it's sort of 10 to 12 criteria. There's sort of a combination of some of the criteria, or a slight sort of overview of some of the criteria. It doesn't get anywhere near as in depth as the assessment process. And again, it is a self-assessment tool. So it doesn't necessarily require evidence at its most basic level, but it is a really good way for SMEs or FMs or suppliers to understand their kind of starting point. There's about 40 questions or so with a sort of select all approach. And then scoring is based off of, there's probably about 5 to 7 responses per question, and there's different scores on each sort of response that an FM puts. And at the end, there's a sort of useful dashboard that I'll show you in a minute that really helps companies dig a little bit deeper and understand where they've scored well, where they haven't scored very well, and what sort of next steps they need to take to progress. As I mentioned, it's for SMEs and companies at the beginning of their sustainability journey. And it also is something that we want to encourage FMs to use with their suppliers. We've seen an increase in FMs wanting to understand their supply chain emissions and sustainability performance. I think this reflects a lot of increasing requests for data on Scope 3 as part of the changing regulatory environment. And more companies are realizing that they need a more structured engagement process with their supply chains. So this tool can really provide a great starting point for FMs. It's a less intensive way of getting a baseline of what companies are doing. We know that the assessment process is incredibly useful, and it really helps dig deep into what FMs are doing. But for smaller companies and early stage companies, and for supply chain companies, it's simply not practical to expect that level of engagement and understanding. And it wouldn't actually be useful for companies that aren't really doing very much in sustainability. So we really want this tool to be useful for those smaller and early stage companies. Next slide. So as I've sort of mentioned, it is entry level. The sort of aim of the tool is to provide a baseline. The tool itself, it's an online assessment, it's self-assessment, but as part of that, there are different packages available. We'll also have sort of consultations with the SFMI available to sort of help FMs better understand their results, build out strategies from this, and start sort of creating plans for improving their ESG performance. It also helps to highlight any gaps based on the sort of key ESG topics. As I'll show you in the next slide or two, it pulls out the sort of areas where companies aren't performing as well and makes suggestions of what they can do. It provides a really good framework. It highlights the sort of key areas within the FM industry. So it is tailored for FMs and built environment. And that's really important because it's not just a generic tool that looks at sustainability more widely, but it is really geared for the FM industry. So it provides useful metrics and a useful baseline of what companies in this industry should be doing. And it also helps promote greater sort of knowledge and understanding of the key topics and key areas within the FM sector and sustainability. Next slide. So I've just pulled out a sort of few screenshots of kind of what it looks like. So you can see here there's 43 questions. There's intro to each section, explains what the section looks at and why it's important. Each question has a number of different options that you can select. And it also has short guidance at the bottom of each question. So you can understand what this sort of aim of the question is. Next slide. And at the end, I did a sort of test run, as it were, of this. So this is a very poor performing company, as you can see. But it gives you an overall score. It looks at across the E, S, and G, whether you're emerging, whether you're developing, whether you're a leader, and gives you a numerical score. It also breaks down the performance by criteria, breaks down the categories, and for each of the different criteria within the online assessment, you can click in and it gives you analysis of the gaps and the points lost. It develops recommendations based on what best practice is and the sort of next steps you can take, and gives you a sort of really useful understanding of what each of those different criteria is aiming for as a sort of basic level of best practice. Next slide. And you can see here again, it shows you the full breakdown across the different categories within that. And it gives you an analysis as well as a breakdown of what your answers were and how you can improve. All right, back to you, Sunil.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for taking us through the online assessment. So we've had a few questions as well, which have come through. But again, if you do have any further questions on the program, the SFMI program, or also on some of the key findings, please do put that into the Q&A as well. So I should have a drum roll for this bit as well, shouldn't I? So this is for the SFMI awards for this year. So just to take you through each of the individual levels, we'll be running through the Rising Star, we'll be running through the overall winner, and we'll also take you through the organisations that reach the top level, the platinum scoring organisations. So the Rising Star this year has increased their scores significantly across all areas. And as Chris has mentioned, we changed the criteria. We've made and brought in a number of key requirements, which has strengthened, but also made achieving the top scores a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging. And this organisation has been able to demonstrate a real change in how they've operated, how they've brought together an internal structure to be able to respond and meaningfully start to improve the way that they implement sustainability across lots of different areas within their business. So Rising Star for 2025 is Amy. Congratulations to Amy, and well done for the huge progress that you've made in the last 12 months. The Platinum winners in 2025. So we've had more Platinum winners this year than we've had in previous years. And I think, again, it's credit to the organisations themselves, the progress which they're making, the movement and the activities, not just from those individuals that we engage with week in, week out, but also the organisations, the leadership teams from each of these organisations who understand and do value what sustainability means for their businesses. So congratulations to BAM FM, Churchill Group, Equans, Mighty, Skanska, and Vinci Facilities. And the 2025 winner this year has again demonstrated significant progress that's taken place. But importantly, what they're starting to show and to demonstrate is an ability to be able to provide a data-driven performance approach using the insights from the knowledge that they have, and to be able to drive changes in how they operate, both short term and into longer term. That's looking and talking at a proactive leadership approach that's coming through, and the ability to be able to demonstrate continuous improvements in the practices around a range of sustainability activities. So the 2025 SFMI winner is Mighty. Congratulations to Mighty. Well-deserved winner for this year. For both Amy and Mighty, we'll be sending out some trophies for you both. Those will be arriving in their post shortly. So we'll send those out and take some photos as well and post those. Okay. So I'd like to introduce Kristen back in again, and also my colleague Jacqueline, to now open up into a panel discussion. And this will be to respond to the questions that are starting to come through, and also start to unpick some of the information that we have been seeing and receiving as well. There have been a couple of questions which come through around the materiality side. And I think both Kristen and myself mentioned that word quite a bit. Jacqueline, if I can go to you first, and just to explain briefly about what do we mean by materiality, and also a question around what single and double materiality is as well.
Sure. Yeah. So the materiality assessment is kind of, as it says in the tin, is understanding what's material to your organisation from a single materiality point of view, which some global standards require, is understanding what is material from the environment and society to your organisation, and that meets a lot of the financial stakeholder requirements, and then the double materiality is also saying then what is the biggest impact of your organisation to the environment and society around you as well. And it's the EU regulations that require the double materiality assessment. In reality, they're not as distinct as it might seem. To understand what's financially material to you as a business, often you need to understand what your impact is onto the wider environment, because it's intrinsically linked with things like penalties, regulations, kind of other interactions with yourself as an organisation. So our approach is always on the double materiality side. Your outputs then might be more tailored to your audience, but starting from the groundwork of the materiality on both sides enables you to get that right output. And then picking up on the comment that Kristen made earlier as well, with regards to the link between risk and the materiality assessments. And this is something that we see a lot, but when done well, potentially, again, the two are part of the same thing. So to understand what is material to your business and make sure that it is fully aligned with what you do as a business and what's important to you, you build up from what are your risks and opportunities related to different sustainability topics. You understand the impact of them, so you have some sizing there, and then that ladders up to those material topics, which you can then go out and flesh in more detail and prioritise and kind of build into your strategy. So getting those foundations right on how you're doing your materiality assessment, the methodology you're using, then will really help you flow that through to your risk registers, your strategies, and using it as a kind of foundational decisioning tool for your business.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. So we've had a question from David that's come in. So I'll read out all of it. What's the most significant change that's occurred in sustainability? So we've gone through lots of the specific areas, the regulatory changes, decarbonisation, etc. But the question is that the significant nature of the changes that we're talking about, from being peripheral to now becoming central, is that being driven by regulatory requirements and growing clients' expectations for responsibility, environmental responsibility? So the question is the factors surrounding why we've seen the significant change this year coming about from clients and their expectations, or the things that are being mandated by regulation?
Was that one for me as well?
Yeah. For either of you.
Well, I can start, and then we can see what you and Kristen think as well. So again, the two I think are quite difficult to unpick, because sometimes what might be driving your requirements from client side, again, might be them covered within regulations. So there is an increasing focus on regulations, on understanding that full value chain, whether that's from kind of climate risk assessments using kind of TCFD framework to CSRD, ISSB, and they are all expecting you to have a full value chain view. So that's where you will yourself and you'll be having more requirements from your supply chain. I know that's a big challenge for people as well, is kind of on getting supply chain from getting data from their supply chain, but also will be driving your customers to be having more requirements on you. So that may be driven again from the regulations and the increased focus on them. But again, we are seeing kind of year on year an increase in just generally expectations from markets on being a responsible business. But again, kind of chicken and egg is where that's starting from.
Yeah. Kristen?
Yeah, I broadly agree with that. I think regulation is pushing the standard forward. Clients are responding to that, and I think we're seeing. I mean, a lot of FMs aren't necessarily pushed by regulation specifically because they're too small or it doesn't impact them. But we are seeing again client expectations, and also I would say just generally client or FMs are being sort of held to a higher standard, and that's pushing that forward. But I think once FMs begin that sustainability journey and they begin seeing the benefits and the cost efficiencies and the long-term value and growth that can be driven from this, that again creates incentive to push these forward as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I think from my side, if I'm allowed to chip in as chair, I think that what we also see is the huge benefit of having consistency in a global regulatory cycle. Now that we're all starting to talk about the same sorts of things, rather than diverse activities or elements which might cross over and interfere with each other, we are starting to see that consistency between what the regulation is doing and also what really matters and benefits businesses as well. And I think that there's a really positive element there about the ongoing integration between business drivers and then the regulation to support it. Yeah. We've also had a question about the SFMI online assessments for the supply chain. The question here is, are we looking to mandate the use of the online questionnaire at all? So as part of the overall SFMI assessments tool, are we saying in order to get to a certain threshold and level, you must use the questionnaire? I think probably in keeping with some other organisations that do that.
I think that would be quite a serious conflict of interest to require that. So no, that is not what we will be mandating. However, as part of the sort of supply chain engagement, we do expect FMs to be understanding their suppliers. That will increase year on year, but whichever tools and methods that FMs use to do so, as long as they are sort of comprehensive and they are having an impact, it doesn't matter what methods you take. We would say that, for those companies that are wanting to understand their supply chains better and need to have a sort of starting baseline. I've been working with an FM recently on building out their supply chain engagement strategy and road mapping. And the online assessment does provide a great sort of starting point for understanding the sort of sustainability maturity of your FMs that can then provide you with information of where you can target your activities, where you can target your engagement, where you'll potentially need to provide more guidance and materials to certain suppliers, and also where perhaps some suppliers may have more of an impact or less of an impact on your emissions than you had previously thought. So it really provides a good starting point and a good sort of overview of what your supply chain is doing. So no, it won't be mandated.
Fantastic, thank you. And another question about the assessments next year. So from Tom, are there any big changes to the assessment next year that organisations start to act on early?
So no, I don't think that we're planning any big changes. I think for next year, as every year, we try and push the standard a little bit forward, so that companies can't just sort of sit idle. They've got to be continually improving. And any sort of movement forward will be incremental and in line with the sort of wider trends and regulatory environment. So no, there won't be big changes, but there'll be this sort of standard pushing forward of the sector to improve and better understand their sustainability.
Yeah, we've made the big change this year in the restructuring of it. I think very much the key areas that we're seeing around climate risk and around materiality, and in particular, how you do link up those two areas. That's what we want to see more of a demonstration, but that's certainly a continuation of the discussions that we had this year, rather than anything being different as well. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. We've also had a question about as a small company that don't disclose to CDP or EcoVadis, but they know that lots of companies do respond to that. What would you suggest or recommend to them?
Yeah, and I mean, I've received this question before. A lot of companies are starting to get requests from their clients that they benchmark themselves in some form of way, either through CDP or EcoVadis, or we could suggest the online assessment tool. And I would say that there is an SME option for CDP, for example, that is much less sort of energy intensive. I worked with an FM on the sort of full CDP questionnaire this year, and worked with sort of 5 other clients, helping them disclose the CDP. It is a time-intensive process, and I would say for companies first beginning it, don't underestimate how much data and time is required. That's certainly something that we are very capable of helping companies with, no matter sort of if it's their first time or if they've done it before. The SME option is, as I mentioned, a sort of easier starting point if you're a smaller company. EcoVadis is also quite time consuming and has an emphasis on a number of policies and strategies that you have within a business. So if you're early stage in sustainability, responding to EcoVadis or CDP is probably not the best starting point, because it does sort of assume a certain level of maturity. So I'd say, depending on your level and how much work you've done in sustainability, it may not make the most sense. But if it is something that you choose to do, we help clients with both CDP and EcoVadis. So.
Fantastic, thank you. And we've got one other question, which is around supply chain engagement activities. Again, it's a subject area that we've touched upon quite a lot today, both again from looking at it from a materiality perspective, but also it's such an intrinsic part of what the FM service does. And questions around how do we improve the quality of data that comes through from the supply chain?
I can start on this, and Jacqueline, feel free to chime in. I think, I mean, we've worked with a number of FMs. We mentioned the Churchill example earlier, and a number of other companies as well on supply chain engagement. I think the first sort of step is to understand your sort of baseline. A lot of the sort of initial stages of developing out supply chain engagement is understanding where to start, understanding the maturity of the companies that you're working with. You don't want to create a sort of too burdensome ask where you're asking for large amounts of data that these suppliers don't have. So I'd say that giving companies resources and having a structured engagement, as well as very clear asks and also gives. So if you're going to ask for sort of higher quality data and more information around certain sustainability aspects, you have to also have a very clear give of what you're going to give them. You're going to give them training, you're going to give them resources, you're going to give them structured engagement and understanding of how to better measure and understand this data. And this is an iterative process, so it's not sort of one and done. I would say the first step is understanding where your suppliers are currently. Then it's choosing the sort of priority suppliers that it's most relevant for you to engage with, having conversations with them about where they are and where you would like them to be. And then building out sort of targets and a roadmap so that suppliers are fully aware of what the expectations will be. And eventually you can sort of start to embed this into procurement contracts and make this a clear sort of expectation from the get-go. And this can sort of, again, it's an iterative process. So taking feedback from suppliers as to where they're at and where you would like them to be, you can begin to build out a strategy that's both collaborative and useful to both your company and to your suppliers.
Yeah, and I would just build on that. For example, a lot of the times that we see this challenge is with Scope 3 data. I think to reiterate kind of Kristen's point there on, it is work in progress. And so actually be really clear about what you're asking for and the standards you're asking for, and make sure that you understand what's needed, say, to move away from a spend-based to an activity-based metric, to make sure you're getting quality data in. And then moving across at the right time. So don't rush it. Make sure you're getting good data and you're moving across to that supplier data at the right time. So that planning up front it is really important. And as Kristen said, then choose your highest priority areas first and kind of and tackle that.
And setting clear KPIs and metrics that you'll be looking for as well.
Yeah.
I think, it shouldn't be, your goal shouldn't be, oh, we want a more engaged supply chain, we want more data. It should be really clear, we want 50% of our suppliers to provide activity level data on X amount of our products that we work with them on or services that we work with them on. I think, having very clear metrics and how to track progress is really important as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you very much, both. We've also in the chat function put in the link for the report as well. So you can go into the chat function and then click on the link, and that will take you straight through to the report as well. Be some valuable bedtime reading for tonight as well for everyone. So what I wanted to do was to thank Kristen, Jacqueline, for contributions in the panel discussion. Kristen for taking us through the 2025 assessment, the key changes that have come through into the report as well, but also what we're planning on doing for 2026, and behind the scenes Jemima as well, who's put everything together, and fantastic job on getting the report done. So yeah, it's just for me to say thank you very much to everybody for your contributions. Thank you very much for everyone attending today as well. We do have a monthly newsletter which includes some of the policy and the regulations as well. So please do scan in the QR code or go online and sign up for that. Again, it's free to access and free to use that, but it does help to keep you up to date and up to speed with the changes which are starting to happen, and being able to communicate that more widely within the business as well. So thank you very much, everyone, and we look forward to working with you in 2026 on the SFMI programme. Thank you all, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.